In this video, I'm going to give you some symbolic background to the sun, moon, and rising, and that relates to also the north and south nodes of the moon, as well as the part of fortune. So this video goes with a number of threads that I'm going to be covering on some new videos. The sun, moon, and rising, let's start there. So I will repeat this probably many times, but again, you take your whole chart in order to fulfill a certain intent before you ever came into incarnation. So you're an angel, you choose a chart, and that chart allows you to develop something new, to add something new to your character. And as I mentioned in a video that I did introducing the north and south nodes of the moon, in order to actually fulfill that potential of your chart, you have to push in the direction of your north node. So check out that video, which I have linked below, to understand that a little bit. But here I just want to give you the symbolic background of both the lunar nodes, the part of fortune, and then, generally speaking, the sun, moon, and rising themselves. So I want to talk about the sun in your chart, the moon in your chart, and the rising, and what that represents. So essentially, you have in sun, moon, and rising 3 different layers of your being. And the sun, which in the Kabbalah is the central sphere called Tiferath, which basically harmonizes everything in your whole lifetime. So whether you're looking at it as just yourself, or whether you're looking at it as your whole universe, either way, it's basically your heart center. So it's the place where you harmonize all the forces. And as such, your sun represents the center point of your consciousness, and it's also where you work with, potentially can develop your higher self, which means that part of you, that your ego, but as a bridge between your angelic self and your animal self. So if you think about the 3 layers of your being, on the one hand, you're an angel, and then on the second hand, you're a human being with an ego, which is to say a point of consciousness that's not shared by anybody else. And then thirdly, you're an animal. You have a body, you have sexual desires, you eat, you sleep. So all of those sort of instinctual parts of you are also represented by you. The sun represents the middle portion of you, which is the ego. And again, that it is that potential that you have with your consciousness, if you work it well, to bridge heaven and earth. So that's the purpose of the sun. And it's where you can meet, or where you can commune with, or hear messages from your angelic self, which can never descend into your body. So you have to basically come here and then somehow fulfill your intent, which you had before you took the incarnation, but which you may have forgotten. So the sun is very important, and it really is just consciousness. And again, with the potential to fulfill yourself, to fulfill your actual will, which is the universal will of God. Okay, so that's the sun. And we can say a lot more about how to interpret that, and in future videos I may do that. I haven't committed to that yet, but it's important to understand that the idea about the sun being basically that center star about which all of the other planets rotate. So every one of the planets, be it like Venus, which is your love nature, Mars, which is your external pushing action-oriented nature, or even your sexual nature in a more active sense. You have Mercury, which is your lower mind, Jupiter, which is like your higher aspirations and the way that the spirit can organize your universe, etc., etc. So all of those planets orbit the sun, which is your star. So effectively, it's like the sun represents the mini-me of the angel. So it's like the avatar of your angelic self. And so that is essentially the center of your universe, or should be the center of your universe when you're embodied. Now, the moon goes down to more the animal self. So the moon is our sensory nature. So everyone's got a little bit different way that they process information. Some people are very sensitive to visual stimuli, let's say. Some people are very sensitive to sound. Some people are very sensitive to touch. And so no matter what, however you're organized, or maybe even how you instinctually understand or grasp things, danger is coming, things like that, all of that, all of your receptive nature is your moon. And the symbolism there, I mean, if you think about, so you got the sun, you've got all the planets orbiting the sun. One of those planets is the Earth. We'll get to that in a minute. But the Earth itself has something orbiting it, which is the moon. So you've got the Earth and the moon as kind of like this dyad that then the moon orbits, or the sun, excuse me, the Earth orbits the sun. So the moon, if you think about the idea of the full moon, waning and waxing moons, and then the new moon, the moon has no light of its own. So the light of spirit, which is coming through the sun, is reflected by or received by the moon. And so when you think about your animal self, what we're talking about is it has its own life, it has its own way of doing things, but the function, the cosmic function of it is to receive and reflect the spirit variously. So there's rhythmic cycles. So also the moon represents change and natural rhythm. And by working with natural rhythm and not against it, we can be very productive, we can be very successful in every endeavor that we do, because if you try to push against nature, nature will push back. So the moon represents nature. It represents how we receive the light of our spirit through our sun. So that's a very important feminine side of every single one of us as well. And then the third important symbolic part, or a feature that will also come to help us understand the nodes of the moon as well as part of fortune, is the Earth, which is in our chart represented in part by the rising. So of course it's a lot of work to explain the houses in the astrology chart, but the main idea is that if you were to face south the day of your birth, the moment of your birth, due south, then off to your left or east is your rising. So whatever is, that horizon there is your rising. And that's called rising because the houses, what's represented by the houses, or any bodies in the houses, I should say, are going to be rising over that horizon in a certain order. And the first bodies to rise will be in the first house. So that horizon represents the borderline of the first house of your astrology chart. The houses are simply departments of life as far as what they represent. So things rise above the horizon over the eastern horizon, just like the sun, it rises in the east and sets in the west. So that rising, that particular point that you're, when you were born, what was over there, it keys to a certain zodiacal symbolism. So whatever zodiac sign is over the rising will determine your rising sign. Okay, so, and I'm sorry for not being more technical than that, but I just want to give you the symbolic idea. So that basically what we're saying is the rising is your Earth. It represents the true material part of you. So the moon is more like the astral. The moon is more like what vivifies or animates you, but the Earth is like the material part of you. It's actually the elements that can be mobilized by the moon. So again, the moon and the Earth are like a dyad that work together, and they're never really apart. So when I ask you, what's your rising sign, if you happen to know that, I'm asking you basically, how do we assign a zodiac sign to that point that you could see over the east when you were born? And that talks about basically, what is the tendency of your earthy self? What is the tendency of your material nature? Now, interpreting that again, I'll get into much more detail perhaps if I ever do a video on the rising. People will say things like it talks about how you come across to people. In magic, it has a very significant function that we can manipulate, and it's very important to have control over our mask, our rising. But for now, just know it's Earth. So to just summarize everything that I just said, the three important features, the most important features of who you are, your chart, are sun. So that's your center ego point through which spirit can enter your incarnation, or at least the influence of spirit. And then moon, which is basically your astral self that receives the light of your spirit. and also can manifest things on earth, which is the third part of you, which is like the elemental nature of you. So you have the three. So I'll say more about this in the video on part of fortune, but those 3 points in your chart, if you kind of like mathematically just mush them together, that is your part of fortune. That's what a part of fortune is. And so, you know, I'll say how to figure that out and then how to interpret it. But the important thing to understand is that the part of fortune is your sweet spot. So if you can focus your energy or kind of live from that point, whatever else you do, what you're doing is you're basically harmonizing all 3 of those essential pieces of who you are. You're harmonizing your center of your incarnation as far as your ego and your consciousness with your receptive nature that can receive the light of spirit, with your earth that can mobilize all of those things on the earth plane so that you can act in accordance with your basic receptive nature and nature, period, and with spirit as it is as it comes through the center of your consciousness. So that's the purpose of sitting in the part of fortune, you know, basically finding out where it is in your chart and then working from there in terms of both the house that it's in, which again represents some department of your life, and I can go through all those specific ones in another video, and the sign, which will be, so then you'll have an inflection in terms of how you work, you know, how you should focus while you do whatever the heck else you do, anything you do, whether it's art, business, science, magic, writing. It really doesn't matter what you do, but doing it from the part of fortune means that you're basically in your power center as far as your incarnated self is concerned. So that is the basics of the part of fortune. I'm going to say a few words, it's a little tougher about the north and south nodes of the moon, but essentially if you think about the path of the sun through the sky, it's, you know, relative to Earth, because obviously we can also say that we go around the sun, but if we're sitting and we kind of stabilize Earth perspective, we see the sun, you know, going around us in the universe. And in a likewise, we see the moon going around us in the universe. And there are 2 places in those 2 paths. If you kind of project out those 2 paths of the sun and the moon, seen from Earth, then you see that they cross. And in one case, the sun crosses to the north of the moon's path, and in another case, it crosses to the south. Those points where they cross exist on what's called the plane of the ecliptic, which is basically where all the different planets and stuff, it's like a plate or one plane where most of the planets are and where the sun is. And so in that narrow band of what we can see from Earth, the paths of the moon and the sun cross, and those 2 spots where they actually cross, one to the north, one to the south, are the nodes of the moon. And if you think about that, what we're saying is to the north, that symbolically means in an evolutionary direction, and to the south means in a counter evolutionary direction. So it's sort of like given a value. Again, as I say in my other video that I do the intro, it's not that one's really bad and one's good. It's not, you know, let's not get simplistic about it, but essentially what we're saying is where the path crosses to the north, there, that point on the ecliptic where eclipses can happen, that's another thing to think about. That's where the sun and the moon can actually cross paths, so to speak. That is where the north is where we want to basically go forward in our future. So you could also say future and past. Whatever that is representing in your chart by sign and house is where you want to push, you know, into the future. And then the south node is where you're coming from. So in a sense, they represent an arrow of directionality of this is where you should push. This is the direction in which you should push in order to provide enough force for you to evolve in the direction that you've chosen by taking this incarnation. So as you can see, the sun, moon, and rising have a great deal of symbolic power behind why we interpret the north and south node of the moon the way we do, and the part of fortune. And I guess one last word about the part of fortune is, at least the way I calculate it, I don't agree with people who have two different formulas. Sometimes people say if you're born at night, it's this one. If you're born in the day, it's this other one, and they're basically opposites. The reason that I don't hold with that is because if you stick to one formula, which I'll give you, then your part of fortune tracks the phase of the moon under which you were born. And Dane Rudhyar, a very famous philosopher and astrologer, has great works dealing with the lunation cycle and also other aspects of basically the sun and the moon. I mean, he's brilliant on it. Sometimes people find him hard to understand, but to me, he's very worth the effort to understand. But in any case, he puts a lot of significance in the phases of the moon. It's just something, I'm not sure if I've ever come up with an interpretation of those that I feel happy with, but I do feel intuitively that it makes perfect sense that if I'm born under, let's say, like in my case, I'm born under a waxing moon, so I'm born not at the new moon, but a little bit, I think mine's in the second house, so just a little bit further away from the new moon. So that basically says I'm someone who is here to receive spirit and essentially birth it. So in that regard, I'm more of a feminine type of being altogether. My whole incarnation has a more receptive, nurturing function, not because I'm female, because actually, obviously I could have been a guy with this chart. It really doesn't matter. But on the other hand, some people have their part of fortune somewhere beyond the seventh house, let's say, and then they're more of what Dane Rudhyar calls like a seed being or seed man. So somebody who is here to basically fertilize, the cosmos in a certain way. So so there are really interesting correlations between the phase of the moon that you were born under and with the location of your part of fortune. It won't be. It's not like you could always just look at a chart and without knowing anything more and say, well, this person was born under this phase of the moon, because if you're born in high or low latitudes, then it will sway where the part of fortune is in the chart. But regardless, I think symbolically, it's really good to think about why. Why were you born with this part of fortune? And again, I will do another video where I will interpret for you or help you get started interpreting your own part of fortune.